Hey, ZED.run community. Just wanted to throw a quick shameless plug in here for a promotion that we're running for the Maiden. Zed just announced a $100,000 Maiden coming up next week, starting on February 12th, running full week. So Arbitrage is running a promotion. If you buy one of our UUU horses for the Maiden, you'll be entered in a raffle for 10% of our winnings from the Zed Maiden. And also, so we're doing two raffles. We're doing one raffle for 10% of our winnings from the Zed Maiden and one raffle for 10% of our profit from Lucky Maiden 10. And I can just show you real quick here the stable we've got over on Haku. It's the Arbitrage UUU sales stable. So if you just put in Arbitrage UUU on Haku, hit enter, it should pop right up. There it is, Arbitrage UUU sales. And we got 91 horses in there currently, varying price points. We've priced out every single breed that we've done for the past 6 to 8 weeks. So we're not reserving any of these for ourselves. If somebody wants to pay the price for our Ready, Set, Boom Star Strider full, that's in there. We've got things priced out all the way down to, I think this is actually a 1.0 that I found sitting around for 0.03. So there's all kinds of different price points. Again, if you buy one of these from us, we're going to take every stable that buys one, and you'll get an entry for each one you purchase. So if you buy more than one, you'll get more than one entry. And we'll do a quick raffle on our show next week and draw 2 winners. One will get 10% of our winnings from the Zed Maiden. The other will get 10% of our profit from Lucky Maiden 10. So good luck to everybody out there. Hope you all enjoy the show with Facundo. Welcome back to the Arbitrage Run Show. I'm your host, Donkey Teeth. And this week, we have the very special episode with the man himself, Director of Product at VHS, Facundo. What's happening, Facundo?
Hey, man. How are you doing? Nice to be here, mate.
I'm doing great. So excited to have you on. You've been dodging us forever. Kevin, now we don't have Kevin. Kevin, everyone was probably expecting me to pop Kevin on the screen. He's getting married in a couple weeks and had to do something with the fiance, and so he'll pop on in a few minutes here. I told him to just call it off, that you were more important, but I guess he hasn't listened yet. Maybe he will.
Yeah, maybe the whole Star Wars meme. It's a trap. Don't get married.
We'll talk to him when he's on. We'll have a talk about it since we're both married. So Facundo, let's just dive right in. I know you don't have a ton of time, so we're going to try to get through as much as we've got in this AMA. So we want to start out. We're planning on doing this like right after Super Breeds launched, maybe a week after, and then we had to push it back. And you got sick. The kids got you sick again. But now you're feeling a little bit better, so we can dive in on this Super Breed talk. Our first question is coming from Jake. It was the most popular question when we told everybody out on Twitter that you were going to be coming on the show for this AMA. Got like, I don't know, a dozen likes out there. Everybody wants to know about the decision to reveal Super Breeds before the Griffin versus showing that they're Super Breeds like after the Griffin when you reveal the levels of the horses. So is this some sort of technical roadblock? That it's hidden, that it isn't hidden until after, or is there some sort of thought process behind that on your guys' end?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of twofold, to be honest. There's, of course, more complexities around how to implement kind of a hidden breed type of the resulting foal until after you actually griffin the horse, because if the horse remains on race, you could actually check what the breed type. That's on the metadata, right? Like you can just go and see it for yourself. So you will be able to actually detect that a horse that should be an exclusive, it's a legendary, right? So we would literally need to like kind of imprint when the actual mint of the NFT happens, like the wrong breed type or the expected breed type if it weren't to be a super breed, and kind of update it at a later stage when that actually horse gets griffined. Which it's possible, right? In technology, almost everything is possible. It's really about what the delta in terms of effort is for doing these different approaches to different things, and like weighting up, something that we do in product management a lot sometimes is kind of perfect is the enemy of done, or the enemy of good enough, or the enemy of like, if we will need to get things out to users to, again, get it out in the hand of customers, deliver that value as fast as we can, and be able to get feedback on how it works, what the expectations are, how everyone's feeling about super breeds. We want to do that in as fast a cycle as possible. Do we think that there's value on doing that extra work to hide that, so that there's still a bit of that I can buy like an unraced horse, and still get the, the excitement that it could be a super breed? Of course, there's value there, but yeah, at this point in time, the delta in effort required to actually make it work that way, we didn't thought it was worth making it longer in terms of development, and deliver just kind of an MVP of the feature, the 1.0 version of it, if you want to call it Super Breeds 1.0, and move on from there. Now, towards the future, I think there's a lot of value that could be driven from that equation, where like the super breed is not revealed until the horse is griffin. Right now, there's arguments both ways that, like, oh, but what about new users? They might sell a horse that they got a super breed and they don't know, and they shouldn't have sell it. I actually don't buy that much into that argument, because what new user who's like breeding their first horse or their third horse or their fifth horse is actually not going to race it, right? Like the first times you actually get breeding into ZED.run, like the first thing you want to do afterwards is griffin it, right? So they'll probably know it's a super breed fast enough anyways. I don't know if we actually need to show it to them before they griffin it, so that they don't sell it by a mistake, right? That's not really the argument here. So it's a combination of multiple things, right? We also believe, from kind of a game design principle perspective, that feedback loops in games need to be as instant as possible, right? And there's a bit of that excitement of like seeing the super breed land on your stable, that's also like an experience that's kind of part of the product right now. But yeah, not exclusively a technical roadblock decision, right? It's balancing all the things.
Yeah, it sounds like it kind of goes back to that whole opportunity cost being everywhere that you refer to a lot. I mean, I've been a proponent of it, which I have been pretty vocal about, but I do see the other side too. Protecting new users to a certain degree. There's predatory people in every market, and with this being so small, and the crypto space, it's kind of a breeding ground for that. So, I think the market would take care of itself, and I think it has more net positives than negatives personally, with like the potential for somebody to buy an unraced horse for one of their first couple horses and then unwrap it and get a super breed. I think that would be, just an awesome story and draw more people in.
Totally.
You know what I mean?
Totally. Yeah, like I said, we see the value on it as well. And there's, like, again, these type of things where when you're building a product, you want to test the waters a bit with some of these concepts and how things can work before you actually refine it a little bit more, right? And it's also about what we have in terms of our mind of the strategy of where we want the product to be by the end of this quarter and by like halfway this year, in terms of how we actually bring users into the ecosystem, how we onboard more players into the game. And in a sense, many of the decision making when it comes to opportunity cost is not just, should I pay this now, can I pay this now or not, or can I pay it later down the road? It's really more about, does that have the type of value I need to add now or prioritize now when I'm trying to focus on get a product that we can onboard users in, right? What we're discussing here with this keep it hidden until you're griffin is really about the unraised mark. It's more of a secondary layer that as a player, as a new user, you don't read that much into until you get a sort of understanding of how the game works, right? So I don't know, let me put it this way. If we would do it and we would pay that cost, I don't think it would serve new users. It would be more for the type of users that we have now that know the game inside out, that have a very deep understanding of what the market of the horses is. It'll be more of a feature for the specialists, right? Or like guys like you who have really kind of come down to master the current state of the product, right? So given our strategy on this first half of the year, where we really know this is the year where we get ZED.run to onboard a bunch of different people with different motivations into the product and really start growing the game, it's kind of secondary, right? In terms of its priority of that value that we agree exists, right? That value that we exists is a bit secondary to that equation of growth.
Yeah, it makes sense. And actually, I've kind of cooled on this point of view of thinking that it really was necessary as super breeds have progressed. I guess this will tie into our next question here, because when I discussed this with Kevin, since he's not here, his kind of stance was it really depends on how rare super breeds are. Because if you've got them popping out, 1% of the time or something like that, 1 out of every 100, then it really does have a rough effect on that secondary market for unraced horses. If people are trying to play that game of, being a breeder and make money that way, it would have a really negative effect. But with them being so rare, it seems, I don't know that it ends up having that much of an effect, because this is our next question for you, Facundo. So far, there's only been 6 super breeds out of 2,800 total breeds about as of this recording. Is that roughly in line with the expectations? It's pretty rare, right? Like 1 out of every 500 or so.
Yeah, it's, I would say, slightly on the good side. Like there's maybe, the sample size is relatively small yet. So when you're talking about occurrences which are this level of rareness, yeah, 2,800 breeds is not a lot. So maybe I was hoping to see one less or something around those lines. So it's not really far away from what we're looking at. It's also, I guess, remember, like, I don't know, when we started talking about these concepts, there were a lot of discussion in the community around like this should be like 1 every 10,000 horse. It should be like so extremely rare, right? But like, we think that the current balance between what can you expect out of a super breed and the level of occurrence that you can see right now, in terms of how common they are popping up, it's at the place where we're expecting it, right? Because again, like, we should never try to focus on specific horses, right? But not all the super breeds are made the same, right? So given that that's the case, yeah, what we've seen so far in terms of amount kind of matches our expectations, right? They could be rarer, but then if they would be rarer, they should be much more weightful than they are right now, depending on the horses you're breeding, right?
Right. And if you multiply the user base by whatever 50, we're going to see them popping up all over the place. So they feel uncommon right now just because of how small things are, right?
Yeah, well, it's always in proportion to how much expected racing you can see from the size of the userverse, right? Because the rate is what's key, right? If we will have 10 times the user rates than we have now, yeah, there will be 10 times the super rates, but at the same time, there will be 10 times the racing going on. So the rarity, as like how easy you can spot one in the track or the race you're about to join, or like the race you just joined, would relatively remain the same, right? So again, considering that more or less the average amount of racing per new user or per cohort remains relatively stable into the future.
Makes sense. Okay, Facundo, we gotta talk about breeding 3.0. There's a lot of it's polarizing, right? And mostly, I guess, to be polarizing, you have to have a lot of people liking and disliking it. It seems like majority of the community has still not adjusted to breeding 3.0 for, I guess, a variety of reasons that we've discussed on previous shows. I know that you've been keeping up and watching. So I guess to hit on my main concern about breeding 3.0 that I've articulated here in this first question, it's that the value of baseability has been devalued relative to the other traits, with distance preference and variance not being able to be improved through leveling, and baseability is now improved. And as we've kind of discussed, we almost give away base ability by breeding 2 legendaries. If you got 2 level 100 legendaries you breed together, I don't remember what you said the floor was for that, but I think it's somewhere like around 300 is the minimum that they'll start out level wise.
These are soft floors and soft roofs, right? So I think there's like a couple of ones under 300, but yeah,
I noticed
around
that as
that.
well.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'll just kind of throw it out to you, open-ended here. What your view is on this, if you understand the concerns of the community here, and if so, what do you hear them as, and what parts do you see as valid? What parts do you see as racing issues? And if you do see issues, what do you think? What's the approach in resolving them moving forward?
Well, I think there's a bunch of conflict. I don't know if conflicting, but like a few things that I don't believe are true or could be true at the same time around like if we're saying that the value of BA breeding has depreciated in the sense of like horses that have high VA on their starting level composition, right, which is the only thing that you actually inherit, still are able to produce horses that, compared to similar horses on their range inside breeding 3.0, when they're maxed out, are still going to have a VA advantage, right? So I understand the concerns around like before that inheritance of VA was extremely direct. Now it's a little bit more indirect, right? And it only really affects starting level in the sense that if you breed more VA oriented or higher starting level horses, that doesn't need to necessarily have that starting level from VA exclusively. You tend to have higher level starting roles or high starting levels when the horse is born. Now, it really comes down to what you're trying to breed. If you have, let's say, a pure VA NAC led Genesis horse, right? You can breed those that horse with another horse that has, instead of high VA, has more of a variance or a DP profile, to build a horse that's a bit of a hybrid, but has a VA advantage at the beginning that when maxed out, similar horses will have less VA than that horse. So in my mind, this one of the questions you said around like, is this really a racing issue? It really comes down to what are the most effective traits around the 3 traits that the game has inside horses when it comes to racing, right? Like maybe in a way now that you can grind up your VA, even though you can retain that VA advantage at the beginning, that's more accessible to horses that you can acquire a certain level of VA that before they couldn't, because they couldn't breed. If they just had variance or just had DP, they couldn't breed a horse that has a starting VA, and now you can grind that VA. But the starting level advantage of a high VA horse, it's still part of the breeding equation. And that's why I'm saying, is this actually maybe more of a racing problem where, like, given the new type of segmentation that we have, where horses can get better on VA over time, we don't think VA is as valuable as a trait in terms of beating similar competition fields, right? So I don't really know if it's a breeding issue or a racing issue if you look at it from that point. But I understand the concern that you're bringing, or like I can rationalize the perspective of how those horses that used to be extremely preferred breeders maybe now have a little less options in terms of what type of horses you can, or how competitive the horses you can breed with those horses are. Like, yeah, I can understand that. It also depends on the meta, right? Like we had a lot of discussions around variance, for instance, being underrated, and it will be interesting if Kevin would be here, because some of the horses that get brought up usually are like, I know, Miraggio or Rey del Mundo and these type of horses with variance, how underrated it was. But like, if you literally check the pre 2.0 Racing 2.0, post Racing 2.0, but because that's the only real valid comparison, the past versus the present, right? Like not some hypothetical scenario. Those horses are slowly losing win rate, and their show rates have like halved, right? So those horses aren't as competitive as everyone thinks. So I also think that the valuation of VP, variance, and BA, it's in flux right now, when we're still trying to adapt to those as a whole ecosystem. Us that play the game and make the game, those of you guys who just play the game, that's kind of in flux right now. In terms of, is it really variance as dominant as we think over time? Because you need the sample sizes, right, to make these appreciations. I guess you can agree with that at least, right? That in order to be able to really say what's the change on the tables, how the tables have turned in terms of variance, DP, and BA, we need the sample sizes. And as the sample sizes pile on, we are seeing some things play out that are not really that much aligned with what the initial expectation was when the change landed, which makes sense because at that point everyone's just speculating, right? I guess in the short term, we are not looking at modifying, and I think one of the good arguments around modifying or not the VA impact of starting level or higher VA horses or whatever it is into the equation, I think one of the good arguments really came from some of the players themselves. I think it was Souls, when you guys were having the debate that Keith was also part of the show, where he mentioned, this is also kind of a temporary problem. as more breeding 3.0 happens and that becomes the ecosystem, it's not so much of a problem. And as horses are getting into the level 600s or whatever it is, horses are still going to be breeding down onto the bottom of class 1 of sorts, right? Or the middle of class 1 of sorts. So like, what are we going to do then? Keep changing and keep upping up the impact of that BA into new foals? It's like a losing equation, right? When the true balancing comes into being able to raise a competitive field, which is what I think level paid races with conditions like the level 1 to 125 and 26 to 550 and 550 to 51 to 75 are actually achieving in a way. Is giving those horses who are bred maybe with a few level difference, giving them the chance to actually differentiate themselves from our horses. So yeah, in the short term, we are not looking at changing this or rebalancing it. We want to see how aging plays out. We're going to discuss this probably. There's a few questions around the engine, I guess. But there's a bunch of rebalancing that's coming in terms of how fast you can gain XP and all of these things that will change this equation as well. So until those things land and everyone can adjust to like the new kind of paradigm around how the horse lifetime is supposed to evolve, we can go back and look into what breeding high VA horses looks like. But yeah, not at this time. Which I guess is the question then, right, Donkey, if we're looking at modifying this in the short term?
It is, yeah, in the short term, I guess. I mean, I guess all of it's up for modification in the mid to long term, right? It's a kind of a dynamic game that you're creating, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're still, and this is part of as well, if we have a little bit of time to discuss like what the vision of the product is, and I've teased, or I said some of these when I was sitting down with the authors, in the sense that we do plan the development of the game in phases, and we are coming towards finalizing what we think is like the game phase of like actually building a sustainable game that people can engage with and can be played for a decade if we want to. We do believe, I mean, I come from a live operations background of doing like games as a services, right? Like that's just the model I've used for like over a decade. And I believe in what you're saying, but there's a point also where like the basics of how the game work need to solidify and the tweaking needs to be inside certain very tight parameters, right? And our plan is to get there in the next 3 to 6 months and then just move into the next phase of the vision, which is more about the platform phase, more about handling kind of the keys of content creation to the community and the players, and just being more of an ecosystem operator than actually building out more game features, right?
Yeah. So while you were talking, Facundo, Kevin's been lurking here in the background. I didn't want to distract everyone by bringing him on, but let's jump him up here on the screen. Kevin, did you get out of the wedding? Is it canceled?
No, we just put in some work here behind the scenes, getting the run of show all finalized. So sorry I'm late, but what's up, Facundo? Good to see you, man.
Good to see you too, mate.
So Kevin, we're just
so yeah, we were waist deep on some of the.
Well, yeah. So
good talk here.
We were talking about our first question on breeding 3.0, and Facundo brought up the values of the 3 traits and kind of how it's playing out. And Facundo, you brought up Rey del Mundo and Marajo as examples of horses that are kind of losing win share and podium rate. But these are examples of horses that are capped now at 500, although Marajo can move up, and we were discussing today if we might. I guess kicking it over to Kevin, since he jumped on here, I feel like that's a little bit different, talking about the value of variance for horses that are capped at 500 versus the value of variance for a horse like Festus and another one of our variance horses in class 1, Verve. Kevin, you're seeing these horses become more and more dominant as you level, right?
I did wanted to make a point there, though, that my point was that our initial impressions of some of these things are progressing over time, and the data is showing that some of these original impressions might not be exactly as we thought that they were playing out. Not saying that either variance is more important than BA or DP. Like, that's not kind of what I'm saying, right? I'm saying that some of these initial perceptions maybe were not playing as, I know, and maybe Kevin can correct me here, but literally, I think Mirage's and Rey del Mundo's show rate has literally like cut in half, gone from like 40% to like 18 or 20%, right? So I don't think that was the impression initially, and some of these things that we've simulated and projected internally, we might get very fast reactionary type or knee-jerk type appreciations of what's going to happen, but then it doesn't play out exactly. That was kind of my point, right? When we were, and I think the same about this breeding BA 3.0 take. I think over time, especially as aging does its thing, we're going to start coming around to how it's actually working. Sorry, Kevin, that was just my clarification there.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. From what I've noticed, at least with our, like, I'll call them like class 1 variants, 1.0 monsters, Festus is a good example here, where it's got some DP on the marathon side. Used to be just like a win or last natural U-shaper with that variance, where like back in the odds era, it was pulling super good odds, like Princess of Power level odds at times. But looking back at that, and even like when flames were introduced, it never flamed because the podium rate was basically equal to the win rate. And what you're noticing now, especially in 12 gates, Festus is flaming, I mean, over a lot of horses that have a higher level than Festus, and in a bunch of fields that it was not flaming at previously, which tells me the average speed is at least increasing with that 50 level gain that he has had, to where it is contending well, yeah, in that field. So yeah, I've seen that with Verve, seen it with a lot of the variants monsters, and then you got to think about like who is losing the flames. I haven't dug too much into that, but I just assumed it was some of those horses that were probably very BA heavy that are now being caught a little bit on level, and they don't have the variance to shift their distribution up to like the win share, and they're kind of falling more into that second, third, fourth, fifth distribution, which obviously is going to hurt your podium rate.
Which I also think, and this is kind of back to the question that you were making, Donkey, this is where like the breeding and the racing prompts actually overlap, right? And there's been a lot of discussion about, and I think this is actually happening this week, maybe. I don't want to throw Ryan under the bus like today or tomorrow. We're actually rebuilt already quadruple ups as a format to bring that back in, right? In the sense of this is what we're talking about, right? Like there's certain characteristics of certain horses that up to a certain degree, certain formats don't serve them as well anymore. And that's how the segmentation is going to occur between these different type of horses. And some of the horses that you're talking about that maybe start losing win rate or share rate will maybe gain it again if they just stick to top threes and other horses either drop to quads or vice versa, right? Like, so yeah, I think it's a bit of both. There's definitely changes in breeding and racing kind of.
And the key is like, yeah, race selection, having races for all different types of horses, because what you have right now is almost like a trap where if everyone's running double ups and you have to do double ups to kind of meet just to use your stamina and get XP, you may be getting flames in double up. Like Festus would flame a lot in double ups, but that is absolutely not a positive ROI race for Festus. So you're almost getting like misled by flames in that instance. Whereas there's plenty of horses who are losing that podium share and are not flaming, but they are 70% top 6, and they're the printers of these double ups. So I think it does become interesting where like flames are not always the best predictor of success, but in the quadruple ups where that's literally top 3 are getting paid, that's when flame rate like is everything, right? Like that's all that matters. Just finish in the top 3, get that podium.
Yeah, and I guess Facundo, just to wrap this up, so like, do you have any concerns at this point that variance is going to be too powerful relative to the other two traits, base ability and distance preference, as this happens, knowing that those horses with high variance already were really good in these top 3 and winner take all formats, and variance is that trait that you need for a champion racehorse, and they started at lower starting levels based on whatever the formula was. So now they've got more levels of base ability to gain relative to these other horses that were predominantly base ability and distance preference to start. So knowing that and seeing how it's played out so far, do you have any concerns that it's overdone towards these variance horses, that they're just going to be too powerful when they get to level 700?
Well, I think there's 2 things there. One is what we just discussed about how much possibilities we can provide so that there's more segmentation between the horses themselves in terms of what formats you're targeting, which I think the more room we give, for instance, with the coming of quadruple ups, the more room we give for other horses who might not compete with the extreme variance horses to drop into quadruple ups. The extreme horses that have that variance will get more smooshed together, and that will hurt what you're talking about. Like it's a self-balancing act in a way, right? It's like any game. Okay, there's a dominant meta. When everyone is doing the dominant meta, that kind of cancels each other off a little bit, right? So I think that we have the tools, and we're building more tools through the racing segmentation options, right? Now that we have proper kind of horsepower segmentation in place. Inside those big chunks of horsepower segmentation, we can offer racing opportunities where these horses just naturally bunch together. I'm not really that concerned. And again, I think we need to let it play out a little bit longer to see actually how dominant variance is going to end up being with some of those things there.
I think that makes sense. I mean, it's an interesting point you make around, like, I always say you have to kind of zig when others zag. And that's back when ZED was very broken with the spook chain and all those things back in like early 21. That's one of the reasons why when odds were a thing, if I ran Mirajo in a marathon trying to tank, it was the only sprinter in there. So if it ever got the like inverted roll, we called it, when it was just super correlated, like all the marathoners would have a bad run and the one sprinter would have that good run, and it would win every time because there was just no horse like it in the field. So yeah, that's interesting. I just thought of that when you mentioned kind of all horses going in the same meta. I think I'm good here. You got any follow-ups on that, Donkey?
No, well, our next question does just kind of tie into this where I started it. So I'll take that one, Kevin, and you can take the follow-up after that. So Facundo, knowing that this change has a lot of people's concerns with breeding 3.0, right, is that it's devalued their Genesis Nakamotos because they're predominantly base ability. A lot of them didn't have a lot of distance preference or variance unless they were the freaks. Mm-hmm. So is there, if you're not looking in the short term to tweak this, to increase that value of that base ability that was that differentiating trait for Genesis Nakamotos, are there other things that are kind of in the pipeline that you can maybe tease for us? We already know, right, that aging is coming, and there's going to be benefits to having a Nakamoto purebred bloodline and Sabo, and it's going to kind of scale down for aging, right? Are there other things that you're already developing or thinking about that you can share with us to bring some value back to those assets?
I would say there's quite a few things that we've been kind of brainstorming beyond what you just mentioned that's already in a quite grounded fashion that we can share it, right? Because we're actually building aging, right? So that's just in a nutshell what I can speak of with 100% certainty, that we're going to have a degree of differentiation between the bloodlines, between what's going on in terms of the amount of races it takes you to age. If you combine it with the difference in how much XP you require per level based on bloodline as well, it's literally just going to, if you would stretch the bloodlines over time of how long of an experiment a horse of a particular bloodline can be, it's just going to make Nakamoto's have, let's say, a longer shelf life of sorts, like, right? And that's going to be like a big differentiation, which is, of course, going to be grounded in pricing in many ways. There's a bunch of other things that we've been discussing around more granular type things that we want to introduce into the future. I know that things like catalysts have been discussed in the past around, what if there will be items that will impact the breeding layer of the game, right? And basically our take is as these things go into the drawing board and we try to figure out what place they can take into the equation, we always look at it from the bloodline perspective as well as the breed type perspective, right? So nothing I can really share concrete enough so that we don't need to be discussing in 2 months why we actually discarded that idea, because it doesn't fit into the current thinking. But yeah, it's kind of front of mind at all times, because we kind of have a UX/design debt that we need to pay, where there's all this meta that was created during the mints or during post. It's a super codes discussion every time, right? We need to make sense of that meta before we move on, or as each thing we do, we need to make sense of that meta. And that's our take on it. So beyond the agent, nothing I can really share right now, Donkey, in terms of bloodline benefits. But that's our take on Nakamoto value, for instance. Like, we just don't believe that the only benefit from bloodlines, for instance, needs to be on the breeding loop, let's say, or the breeding instance or the breeding event, right? If you think of it that way, now with progression, before, what's the big paradigm change with progression, right? It's like before 100%, let's say, of the value of an NFT was created at the breeding event. That's how it used to work, right? Now part of that value is developed through the, let's say, the asset's lifetime, right? We believe that that's also how the meta needs to operate on things like bloodlines, right? The benefit of owning Nakamoto doesn't need to necessarily just happen all at once when you breed a Nakamoto, right? Using or racing a Nakamoto could also have different benefits, right? So that's kind of our take in general.
Nice. Yeah. I'm glad you guys are thinking about that. And I think, yeah, almost all of what you've done has at least had that mindset, even going to what you're talking about with like XP, just the subtle benefits of making those matter, because I think it could be lost in the shuffle. So I'm glad you guys are prioritizing it. And speaking of bloodlines and breed types, next question we have is on breeding and the new stud minimums. So I think that was updated a couple weeks ago, right? Where just some reallocation of the costs. So what was the thought process behind the values you chose and like what you reallocated the most?
So there's technical aspects of how the breeding works in terms of the fee determination, depending on what horses you're breeding, which are kind of, and again, this speaks to, I would say, design debt that was, incurred at some point in the past based on the same spirit, right? Like what we do at BHS and ZED.run is in many senses, like myself as a game developer, I feel it's really cutting edge in many senses. And at some point, many of the concepts, the priority was like, we need to get this into the hands of customers because we're trailblazing a new space as fast as we can. And that needs to kind of be the thinking as much as you can, especially when you're developing like this is like a whole new slice of entertainment that's coming up around NFT gaming, right? So some of these decisions are made in a way where like we just want to get this out. And for instance, when it comes to the pricing of the breed types and the bloodlines, we don't have 100% freedom to change all the pricing independently based on how it's built, right? Like I can't just touch any single price, for instance, independently. If I touch one price, our price changes, and I need to like make it work so that the logic is as close as possible to what we have. And that's something that, yeah, we want to work a little bit more, probably as soon as we have some extra time during this year, right? Around like give us the flexibility to change many of these pricing a little bit more independently, right? In particular, if I want to be more specific, we think that the drop in bloodlines as it is now, if you look at it from like a Genesis level, makes sense. We would like to have a little bit more flexibility of what happens breed type, or like as you go down the breed types, a little bit more granular, right? Which right now breed type has a massive impact on where you're going to land, right? So having the ability to, maybe in a sense, yes, you can feel that pacers and crosses or exclusives or elites are a little bit too expensive compared to a ledge or a Genesis horse, for instance, right? But if you ask me what's the difference between what we could do, when we could do it in order to support the release of super breeds to where we would want it to be, it's not miles away. It's close, right? Because again, the logic is still at the underlying logic is still, now that breed type has a much bigger impact, that needs to make more sense, like in terms of how cheap, for instance, Genesis build was, right? And where it lands you. So
yeah, I think that was the biggest thing when I looked at it, where like the misalignment between the drop off in price, which it drops but not terribly significantly, and the reward you get from breeding a Genesis with a Genesis compared to like an exclusive with an elite, right? Like you are doomed to class 4, say, doing that second combo, whereas Genesis to Genesis, I mean, no matter what the level of that racehorse is, could pop in class 1 and be pretty good. Whereas it just like, it was, I don't know, the minimums didn't quite align with that risk reward, I feel like.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I would maybe debate the pretty good part, but that's where it becomes a little bit muddied for the player, right? Like there's some Genesis which at that price are like, well, man, this is a steal, and some Genesis that are at that price like, I don't know, breed with that one, like, and that's a problem, right? Now it's also a matter of fact of like how the stud determination works, right? It's based on the strategy you're using, and not specifically on the pairing, and that. And I know we can probably also debate about having to use 2 stables to breed because of the discounts, which is like, again, some decisions which are more designed than other things. Like if they were built as in that way for a reason, and changing them is not as easy as like, oh, just go change a number and we're done, right? That hamper us from like, again, I'm a huge fan of, perfect is the enemy of done, or of like good enough, and just get that value to customers as fast as we can. But yeah, that's really, so, it's the answer is twofold. There's a little bit of technical constraints. The general spirit of the price changes is in the lines of what we want to do, even if we would like to have, for instance, more granularity of drop off on the breed ladder.
So yeah, if I'm hearing you correct, I guess when I first saw the prices, my takeaway was, well, you guys want to incentivize breeding with Genesis and bring value back to Genesis based on this price tiering, at least at this stage in the game. You're saying that it's more designed debt, and it's just you weren't able to lower those prices, or was it a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B?
Yeah, like I said, I think that we would, if we could do it in a more granular fashion, where we could determine just prices manually. This is what this costs. This is what this costs, and what one thing costs doesn't impact what the other things cost. Like right now, it's a bit of a formula that smooshes, has a base price, and smooshes everything and spits all the prices out, right? I think we could have gone a little bit harder on the drop off from like Genesis down to Baser, right? Because that has a much bigger impact right now on the equation, right?
And you hit on another one of our questions there in that answer about the need to use 2 stables to breed. So it wouldn't be possible for you to just increase, because like you get the in-stable discount at 35%, right? It's not possible to just up that to 56%, and that's like a huge task on the this design debt field front that you're talking about.
Again, it's not a huge thing, but again, it's kind of baked into the breeding contract, and it's not just me going and changing the value and we're done with it, right? Keep into account that every time we do contract deployments or we touch or we play around with the contracts, we need to be very, very careful. There's like security reasons for that, and like and that we are very exhaustive whenever we create new contracts or modify contracts majorly. We do audits on them, which take time and money, etc. Right? Like, I think honestly at this point, that's one of the things that I think that if I would have infinite time and infinite resources, 2 things that I would allow us to do in the short term would be allow for at least 1 private cover to be taken internally without the need to go in through a stud farm, and at least 1, because we still want blood to flow into the ecosystem, right? And this change, right, around the discount that they need to use, like, because that's the thing, all of us just use 2 stables. It's not.
It's pain.
Yeah, it's an unnecessary UX friction that we don't need for no reason, right? So,
I have one more follow up on breeding, then we can move on. So one thing I was thinking about with the introduction of XP and like the grind, right? It's almost a handicap having a stallion in this mode if you're actually trying to stud it out to the public and kind of find that market value, because we're not able to race at the same time horses in the stud, right? I'd almost rather have a female, and then I breed on as I want to. So is there any?
It spits it out. Yeah, I totally see your point. And again, this is remember, I think it was, I don't know if it was the Osses or with Danshan, I said like, what's the most important nature of games is that games are just a recollection or a sequence of interesting choices. These are not interesting choices. These are dumb choices that have like a very clear answer. Like, why would you do it any other way as a player? It makes no sense. It's a boring choice. Adds no value to the decision-making process. I'm pretty sure no one feels engaged by the fact that they need to make a call between studying their horse or racing it. Like, just
headache.
Not right. Like, yeah, and again, for me, I'm a little bit like a broken record with some of these answers around, like, oh, opportunity cost. What do I fix? Do I fix this, or do I fix something else? It's like, but it's the true nature of the situation of like managing a product that has been on the development frame for a very long period of time, and has a bunch of history of why decisions are made and how they're built, and sometimes the people who made those decisions or built those decisions is no longer part of the studio. So there's a lot of complexities in that, and how we manage that depth and how we like get to tackle it, right? In a way, in my mind, when ZED comes out of beta, right, we should have tackled at least 80% of these kind of legacy designs, which are not just very usable in the long term. So hopefully, yes, we can deliver on that before we get out of beta.
Okay, good to know.
And if you ask me when we're going to after beta, I'm going to say like TBD. So
fair enough.
Don't go there.
So it sounds like that a lot of the stuff that people are frustrated about, that we're frustrated about in the game design and the UX design, is stuff that you inherited and that is an issue that you don't necessarily have the time and resources to address at this time, because it's all on the blockchain and all buried in these contracts and stuff. And right now your sole focus is on getting this functional game loop that can be marketed to bring in new users. Correct me if I'm wrong there. Aging is that piece that kind of fits into to complete the game loop as you see it. And we want to ask you some questions about it. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the starting stepping stones. We also believe that XP peer-to-peer trading will also be part of that loop as well. It's going to create a resource economy inside the ecosystem, which won't be entirely ETH-based or exclusively ETH-based, which is also going to give, like real play-to-earn potential to the product in many senses. And there's other things that I can comment on that sense as well. There's things that don't exist on the chain that also have a little bit of that, like, I don't know, filters, which I can happily say that I think it's literally within the next 3 weeks, we're going to have an updated set of filters out there. And that's all front end. It's not on the chain. It's just like sometimes some of these things are like, I mean, and you guys can probably see me racing some of my glue ponies almost every day. And I endure these pains myself going through the lobby. It's like, Jesus, like my poor scrolling wheel on my mouse is like asking for a change, right? Like, and we understand all of those things. It just becomes a product making decision of like, sure, we need to fix filters, for instance. We shouldn't try to scale a product with this level of filters on the lobby, right? Now, can we survive with this filter for another month while I'm trying to finalize aging or close some of these bigger things? We think we do, and that's the decisions we need to make, right? So, not always only on the blockchain, but yeah, in a nutshell, there's a lot of things to catch up with that are just not secondary, but not life or death, right?
Makes sense. So on this topic of aging, Facundo, I think you've said before that the rate of XP gain is going to increase once aging is launched, and you can correct me if I'm wrong after I finish the rest of the question. But knowing that, if that's true, do you envision a landscape where most horses are able to reach their max level, 700 for Genesis and so on, prior to their max age setting in? Or is that going to be more of a rare feat for horses to accomplish?
Sorry. And you guys are cutting out really bad. As far as I understood, aging, XP gains, horses being able to max out, is that a thing once we do the rebalance of XP? We're trying to think of this way from a UX product experience. Like we said, when we release XP gains, we're being extremely conservative to begin with, right? Because the main problem with the nature of the ecosystem we inherited is the inflationary nature of breeding. And the more horses that get bred, especially with the fact that we went from 1.0 to 2.0 to 3.0 now, we need horses to phase out of the ecosystem, right? So in the beginning, we wanted it to be conservative so that a ton of horses weren't getting to the top really fast. Now, our take is that there's definitely need to be a component of not balancing this just on the numbers to begin with. Okay, how many races? The 5,000 races, 2,000 races. In terms of the agent, it needs to be more of an experience that it's based on the breeding cycles, which are monthly, right? So for instance, I breed a horse. How long after that horse is bred, if I race it every day, let's say on paid, even if it's just 250s, how long after I bred that horse, I should be able to say, this horse, I should not waste any more time with it, or I should try to max it out? How long into the user experience that decision-making point needs to happen, right? And after that decision-making point has happened is how long after I've made that decision-making from there until that horse reaches, let's say, the top of its class or its max potential, because you know that we've mentioned in the future that we are going to get to a point where horses can go from their minimum EVO to their max EVO, regardless of what their starting EVO is. That's just not part of the product yet. Like an exclusive will be able to go, if it starts at EVO 5, it will be able to go to EVO 6 eventually. We just haven't released the ability to do that with the horses, regardless of their starting EVO. So how long between the point that you decided that you want to keep investing on a horse until the point that horse gets maxed out, at least within its class? And that's how we're trying to think about it, right? Like what the experience needs to be time-wise for someone who's like, you know, trying to get a feedback on the decision-making loop that happens on the breeding, because that's the true nature of ZED.run. ZED.run is actually more of a breeding game. Racing exists there actually to just provide feedback on if your breeding decisions were good or bad, right? So the racing component is like, okay, adjust, do I breed more of this way? Do I breed more of that way? Of course, there's decision making around, do I race it more in this funnel? Do I race it more in that funnel? But that's more like field dependent, right? So that's how we're thinking about it. Like agent needs to be about, it has an ecosystem impact, which is about, you know, I like the way Steve Jobs put it around, you know, he says death, or he used to say death is life's best invention because it gets rid of the old to make space for the new. So aging has an ecosystem purpose, but then the lifetime of a horse from inception level to determining it's a good horse to invest or keep investing or just discard it and try something different when breeding, or try the same thing and see if you get a better result from the same parents. And from that point to like maxing it out. And then at that point, it's just like, okay, I'm just trying to milk this horse as much as possible because maybe it's maxed out. We're thinking it from a user experience point, right? Of like what that should take. 6 months, 3 months, right? And then aging is really more about like, because, and this is the part where like, you know, we were discussing, oh, should we change breeding? It's like aging is going to change a ton of the equations, and we all need to adapt to those equations before we really understand what the new paradigm of the game is, where every horse is actually going to be like an experiment. That's going to have like, not an expiry date on it, but it's going to be a kind of a finite over time experiment, right? And the difference between maybe a good horse or a bad horse or a very profitable horse or a not so profitable horse, maybe it's the amount of races it has left before it ages at its max level. Maybe that's the equation, right? And a horse that reaches its max possible level, let's say within a class, without upclassing. Let's leave upclassing because that's a longer journey. Like, I know, grabbing a 300 level Genesis, taking it all the way to 700, that's a separate discussion. Let's imagine a class 2 horse that starts at the bottom of class 2 and goes all the way to level 500, right? What that journey needs to feel like and what that lifetime of that experiment needs to feel like. Like you bring a horse after maybe a few weeks, a month, maybe you already know if it's a horse that you should invest on or not. And maybe once XP NFTs are part of the equation, remember that we've discussed the facts around that kind of be like, boom, I sank 100 levels on one horse in one moment, right? It needs to be like time limited over time. You still need to raise that horse. Maybe I go from a month to 2 weeks, and in 2 weeks, I already know if that horse is worth it because I took it from level 505 to level 540. And I can already tell if it's going to be able to compete at the top, right? And then from that point, it maybe takes 2 months and 1 month with XP NFTs maybe to take it to kind of its 95th percentile potential, right? To level 490, 495, where it's actually, you know, there is still a correlation between levels and performance, even though like a 430 can beat a level 590 on the operation, right? Like, you know that those horses at the top of the class, even though they can't keep leveling up, they are probably at their best moment of how they can perform that class, obviously, right? So you see how all these things compile into like trying to figure out, you know, are the horses I'm getting good or bad, and should I affect my breeding strategy or not? Needs to be time-based and needs to be experience-based. So can a horse get to max level? I would say there's differences around what do we mean, because it's race-based, right? So can it do it on 3 races before it starts aging out? Maybe not, right? Depends on starting level. Maybe can it max out itself, let's say from bottom of class 2 to top of class 2 on 250s or $5 races before it starts aging or before it's fully aged out? Probably, right? That would make sense in my head. Again, as the experience I want as a player, right? Like, yeah, okay, I know that once a month I sit down and I breed all my horses and I try the next generation of my strategy and see what works and what doesn't. And how long, you know, maybe I need to skip one breeding cycle to draw solid conclusions. But you see my point? It's really need to be based from an experience perspective. What do we want players to do? And that's kind of some of the current conversation that we're thinking, right? Of like, maybe a horse after a month, you already know exactly where it's going to be when you fully max it out. After 2 months, maybe it's fully maxed. And at that point, maybe you have just 2 more months to race it before it's racing at the point where it can, you know, I don't know, race once a day or once a couple of days or whatever the last aging is. But that's our thinking of like each horse is kind of a go at an experiment of a particular breed type, of a particular pairing of parents, a particular strategy to dominate. Again, you guys know that breeding right now is much more, I'm breeding this horse to dominate class 2, top 3, this, like it's this distance, right? It's much more focused now, right? And it's just about getting that feedback loop on a time that's sensitive. Like right now, even at running at high stakes, it will take you years to max out a horse, right? And we don't think that that's just going to work. No one's going to, right? Like everyone's going to max out their horses if we keep those scouts. So these are all the things we're considering.
Yeah. Gotcha. When you say fully aged out, is that more like, are horses going to get to a point where they literally cannot race, or is it going to be that's like the terminal velocity where they can race 10% of what they're racing now, or even way less?
Yeah, of course, Kane. There's no point because of how we're building the aging where a horse cannot race, right? And this talks a little bit about like, and we can discuss this a bit, the kind of the separation between the stamina refactor that we're working on right now and aging we're actually going to start working really soon on to deliver before spring comes, right? We need to change the way stamina works. We need to just simplify it, right? Stamina needs to be like a much more simpler game type currency where you just have, I don't know, 10 points of stamina and entering a race costs 1 point, and you regenerate 1 point every, I don't know, 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And when you age, you regenerate a point every 3 hours. And when you age again, you regenerate a point every 4 hours. So you go from like 12 races a day to 8 to 6 to 4 to 2 to 1 race a day or whatever the amount is, right? So the max aging threshold, let's say you're age 10, let's say it's 10 levels of aging, might be you regenerate 1 stamina point every, I don't know, 48 hours, to use a number, right? So you can race that horse once every 2 days, for instance. Or you can just wait it to fill up the 10 points back after 20 days and run the 10 races at once. I don't know. That's really up to the player, right? But yeah, that's how it's actually going to work.
I like that. I think that's a clever way to do it where, yeah, you're not like totally killing the value of the beasts, but you're freeing up the rest of the ecosystem where, yeah, if Ready, Set, Boom only gets to race 10 times every 20 days and there's tournaments going on or something that's going to use a lot of the stamina at once, I might, wait that full amount of time so then I can just go all in for a big tournament, right? So I think that's a good way to do it, a good middle ground to free up the system without totally killing the value of the beast.
Same with like Sit and Goes, right? Which is like on our roadmap for hopefully end of Q1 or early Q2, right? Sit and Goes will be on that natural as well, because like for instance, if you pay stamina up front, or like you need to reserve a certain amount of stamina, and the stamina still gets consumed when the horse race, doesn't matter. A sit and go would be potential 3 races. A QF is at least if it's 192 horses, it would be a QF, a semifinal, and a final. You would need to have 3 points ready to go at once. And if you're charging 1 every day, basically you need to stop racing X horse for 3 days to be able to accumulate that stamina, right? So there's a lot of decision making there that, again, we think it's interesting decision making, right? Choices players will actually want to do. There's also options around, and again, these are things we're trying to figure out exactly which place they take on the ecosystem, but we can have segmentation that takes place without the need of certain horses to age out fully, right? Like we could have conditional paid races, which are only for horses who haven't aged ever. So the moment all the first cohort of horses hit age 1, they already cannot compete with those horses in those races, right? For instance, we could do that really easily, and we wouldn't need to wait 3 years or a year or whatever the final amount is for full aging to occur, for us to start being able to provide opportunities for segmentation of horses of similar, let's say, just breeding algorithms. Like the key here that we'll need to understand is that an ecosystem can never grow if the most basic premise of a racing game fulfills. Why do people play racing games? In a nutshell, because they want to be the fastest. That's it. That's the fantasy. That's the thrill, and all that comes with it. The banter, you suck, I'm the king, like all that comes around it. And of course, the winning of ETH in this case, and all that comes around it. If the game works in a way where I cannot do that because someone else, yours truly here, like already has a base horse, the game's not fun to play. Like, why would I play it, right? That's the inflationary nature of breeding. Why would you breed if like 2.0 could already not produce as good as horses as 1.0, right? That was just the case. And 3.0 is the same, at least on the PM variants, than 2.0. So you cannot produce the same, like 1.0 level variance horses, unless maybe you get a good super breed from good parents, right? That's kind of the loophole.
Tried that. Didn't work out.
Well, super dot might not be the super dot might not be the right one, but other ones might actually hit it, right? Like it's possible, right? We just need a way for the old to get just aside for the new to emerge, right? And that's in a nutshell why we need aging to be part of the ecosystem, because breeding, it's inflationary in nature. The more breeding that goes on, the less of a reason there is to breed. This is just like very basic game design principles, right? And, it was just not taking account from the beginning, in a sense.
So Facundo, we got time for a couple more questions?
Yeah, I can do literally an hour, 20 minutes.
Okay. Yeah, we'll ask, I think we should be able to get to 3 more then. So the next question that we want to ask you is about, we got a couple questions about the future of ZED. And I think you caught that show that we recorded with Ryan last week. We talked about some of this, but curious your vision, since it's, vision and how we see the future is kind of an individual thing. Can you share your rough vision for what the upper end of ZED ends up looking like, and talking about like championship tier events in the next 12 to 18 months? And with this question, I'm thinking back to, what you talked about on that first AMA with Dan Shan, with the World Series of digital horse racing type events being kind of that ultimate potential end for that top tier. What does it look like in 12 to 18 months along that path?
Yeah, remember, I think that word by word, what I kind of said was, if we don't get there, I think we should accept that in a sense we failed to deliver part of the vision of ZED.run, because I think in everyone's minds when they think ZED.run is, ZED.run could be as big and as glamorous and as status driven and as huge as real horse racing is, right? So if we don't get to that point at some level, we have that level of events, it would be, I would consider it a failure, or at least partly a failure, right? Like this is not a 0-1 question, right? There's gradients here. Our vision of ZED.run definitely, and I hinted a little bit at this at the beginning, like we have like in our minds 3 distinct phases of how we need to build towards that, right? I think that one of the problems that Ethereum has had in the past is that we're trying to build everything at the same time, and that's problematic, right? What we first need a solid game that's enjoying to play, and like again, the base layer of the game makes sense, and that's agent and the class system based on horsepower and progression, so that you can progress with all those things in place, plus new avenues of playing the game like XP NFTs, or in a way asynchronously training someone else's horses would be XP NFTs in a sense, as an alternative to play the game and fund your stable strategy. All of these things really collaborate into that first stage of having a solid product that people would want to engage with, right? And that doesn't have fatal flaws that prevent us from onboarding people into a product. Then the next phase of that vision is really about handling those keys of the content creation to a community, right? Like I hinted about a little bit about this too when we were discussing with Diosas, in terms of the vision of ZED around what about race organizer? Is that a way of playing ZED? Can I just play as a race organizer? Can I maybe own a few NFTs where I own, I own 1,000 and a 1,200 meter track. Those are the tracks I own because I got those NFTs on a drop or whatever. And I own a few formats, which are other NFTs like top 6 and top 3. Those are the formats I own. And I can organize those races, and can I maybe even run my own tournaments as a second layer of that idea. And in our mind, that is really the foundation that we're building for. That we really believe that what we need to build here is something that users can take in their own hands and take it to the next level when it comes to really even scaling it, once we've assured like a basic layer of exposure and brand recognition, and like, there's still a bunch of people out there who doesn't know what ZED is, right? And that's kind of what we need to do, at least first, as a first initial push of onboarding and doing marketing once we have a product on a better position. Now, the third phase that we never really get to discuss in most of these AMAs, because this is like on itself like a 90-minute discussion on itself, right? Like after that platform stage, we just really see our job as like ecosystem management, right? It's really about, okay, how much XP is going out into the ecosystem? Should we need to tweak that or not? We're just going to be tweaking very specific variables. The idea at that point is that this has kind of almost a life of its own, right? Like we shouldn't be the ones organizing the World Series of ZED, right? Of course, we can, what we do with the treasury management and that. That's also where those funds are there for, of course. But the idea is that it's, I would say, 80%, 90% community driven, right? And we have, of course, C1 Premier type stuff. Of course, yeah, we think that that's the type of stuff that we need to do. But it's kind of the layer at top, and our job reduces dramatically, right? Like you guys know how it is when the tournament layer now relies completely in our hands, except for the custom tournaments that we do with third parties, right? Now, once that's just the norm instead of the exception, we think we can have a level of activity in the ecosystem that would justify, I don't know, quarterly $1 million pots or whatever it is, that you can compare with like, wow, this is a very big ticket event, right? This is like the World Series of ZED.run, right? And it might even happen at a physical location, and you might even buy tickets to go see it, right? But like, again, it's we need to build towards that. We cannot build that, right? And that's one of the biggest challenges with ZED.run as a product, and how to develop a product to build towards that, right? Like, I think we can all agree that a big chunk of that initial influx was just the NFT fad or the momentum of NFTs on 2021, right? With that out of the equation, we need to slowly build towards that, right? We need to build towards that big ticket type, World Series. You can call it whatever you want. The World Cup, I would call it.
Metaverse.
Yeah.
Metaverse Cup of ZED.run. The good news is that I think our community is kind of second to none in the space. They've proven people much more intelligent than me to run these events in the past, and I think having a even more functional product will only make that job easier. So looking forward to that. Next question I had was around just like the in-game loop of ZED. So that seems to be like a lot of what games are these days, right? Like you level your whatever up, and then you play the game at that max level. Is that the vision for ZED? Is it level 700? Is there a different approach you're taking to the end game?
Well, I think that the end game, I understand what you mean in terms of the end game when it would come to an RPG or a more classic gaming experience. This is an exclusively PvP experience, right? So really, end game in any kind of PvP type game, it's really about staying at the top of the meta and being number one. That, like any other competitive, sorry guys, any other competitive game out there, that is kind of the end game, right? Is remaining at the top for as long as possible and everything that comes with it. Now, do we think there's more nuances in some of the loops that we can add as the game progresses and as we try to wrap up kind of the game phase? We do believe that there's opportunities out there to do a few more things, but they will always be probably on a meta level. Like the end game will always still be, I need to breathe, like what you were saying, where everyone's doing ZAG, you need to ZIG, right? Like it's always going to be, I'm trying to read what they are like on your guys' levels, right? Like Arbitrage, ZED, and you don't like with your partnership and competing with other players on your level. Your end game is really about, I need to be thinking one step ahead of them. Again, once agent is a thing and when the meta is played in generations, instead of like, okay, I get this horse, I'm done. Like this is just a one-time thing. Once the game is played in generations, the meta will really be about what type of horses is, Southern Farms or whoever it is going to be throwing in this type of races in 2, 3, 6 months from now. And how do I prep to bred the type of horses I'm going to beat him with, right? And some seasons will be on the top. Some seasons you might be third or fourth. And that will really be kind of the end game. It's really that PvP experience. Regardless of what extra nuances, like we were just discussing potential breeding catalyst, for instance, right? Let's imagine that there's an item economy in the game where you can affect the outcomes of the breeds partially through another extra type of NFT or whatever it is, right? That still means to an end to that end game. It wouldn't be the end game on its own, right? So the end game in a nutshell is still cream of the crop PvP competition. That's what everyone aspires to. Like, how do I become the best and beat the other guys who are at the top layer, right? That's the end game.
Makes sense to me. Any other follow-up on that there, Kevin?
No. Gets me excited.
Facundo, last question for you here. We'll let you get some rest. So you mentioned on your last show with the Aussies that there's going to be some utility coming for the ZED token finally. Can you give a little bit of a teaser on those token syncs that you said were coming pretty quickly?
Yeah, well, so basically, let me put it this way. I want to be as specific as I can without, being so specific that then maybe I need to correct myself on some nuance that it's secondary and irrelevant to what I'm going to say, right? But like, in a nutshell, what we're thinking is, if we want to introduce XP trading, which we want, and we already started working on how we will implement that so that we can start implementing it, hopefully, again. There's a lot of things converging towards the end of Q1 because we have a plan to, really push out the game, really gallop into 2023 with as many users as we can. That there's a lot of things converging towards that end of Q1. Among those things, XP trading or peer-to-peer XP trading is one of the top of the list. And we think that there's an opportunity to introduce a utility sync of XP trading, literally. Like I've said this before, imagine that you have some sort of pool where you win a race, you get 100 XP points. Okay, 50 go straight to that horse and 50 go to your pool, right? That allows you to kind of stack up to a certain limit, maybe 2x or 3x the amount of XP into a horse that horse has gained in the last 24 hours. That also allows you to take XP out of the system or your wallet, let's say, or your profile, your Web2, your database profile. Take that into, let's say, an XP NFT that you can sell to somebody. You can grab and say, hey, you want to buy 1,000 XP to use on your horses because, maybe I have more free time that you have and I can literally asynchronously train your horses for you. We think that there's going to be a very first good opportunity to do that, right? To actually have a ZED token sync on, let's say, the minting of that NFT. Right, so I know you want to mint 1,000 XP NFT to sell to another player. You might need to spend 500 ZED token to do it, right? And I guess that puts things on a very interesting perspective, right? Because I think it creates first a circular economy with existing token holders, right? Which might not have the time, but they do have the ZED token. And those that have the time might need to be able to, kind of sell their time, their free time to other people who wants to acquire that XP, right? And it also opens the opportunity of what we said before, which is without a token sync, we cannot do token sources. It's simple as that, right? Like if we don't have a place to use the token, I cannot start using the play and earn treasury. Just can't, right? Because basically, the only thing that will result from that is will drain of liquidity exchanges. So like they're already very little volume that they have, right? But in terms of how we can utilize that utility, that's something that we want to do with XP NFTs to begin with. Yeah, that's pretty much as specific I can get in terms of like that loop of trading the XP will have a related or a connected ZED token to it.
Is the XP trading, you may have said this elsewhere, but is that going to happen on the ZED site, or is that a Haku item, OpenSea? Is there a destination for that yet?
Yeah, like I said, we're still working out exactly how it's going to work, but it will probably just be like a tradable NFT. I don't know if don't get technical with missing RZ20s, like RZ21, but doesn't really matter. But most probably the fastest way to market, which is always a priority for us, is probably Haku would be a very, or OpenSea, whatever. Like we always make things OpenSea compliant under their protocol, under their like standardized way of doing things. But Haku always gets things updated first, like super Brits and that stuff doesn't exist on OpenSea. So
Gotcha.
yeah, Haku probably be the #1 destination for trading those XP NFTs, and we will of course. Yeah, sorry.
Once we get into the delineation of XP, where you have some going to the horse that raced, some that go into like your pool that you can then turn into an NFT, is there going to be the capability to apply that in-house without any like ZED sync?
Of course. I mean, the idea is, there's of course going to be limitations around how we want the system to work. As in like, oh, I'll just send you my horse, you put the XP on it and just send it back to me, right? Like, we understand how this ecosystem works, right? So even just time limits, it's like, okay, any horse that lands on your wallet for the first week or whatever, you cannot apply XP from the pool. We already discourage most of that, because who's going to be like, yeah, keep my horse for a week, I don't care. Like, especially if it's an important horse. But besides those limitations, the idea is that I think are actually thinking of maybe even releasing that first. We have the ability to mint the NFTs, right? Like just let's call it the pool management. You get 50% of the XP to your pool, and you can just use that internally. You can just, let's say, stack the XP of 3 horses into 1 horse, right? That it's like the one you want to bet on, that it's going to perform the best. Like, oh, I really think this horse will perform the best. I want to find out faster, right? You're going to be able to go through it, let's say, once we rerun stage in that month discovery process of like, this horse is good or bad, you can shrink it to 2 weeks, right? If the multiplier is 2x. Right, because remember always that it's still always based on the amount of XP that's same horse has earned over a period of time. Let's say the last 24 hours, you can only put an amount based on that amount. So
yeah, we could probably ask another 100 questions about all this stuff. I know you said that you can't give a whole lot more detail on this this XP NFT idea, since it's still conceptual, but I'm still going to ask because I have to. So do you see it as you mint this NFT? Would there be a finite amount of them, or would it be unlimited? Like everybody could mint this XP that kind of has to be free, and then you...
Yeah, so anyone will be able to get the XP NFTs minted and into their wallet and published in the marketplace, right? For anybody else to buy from them, right? And this opens opportunities around like self-funding your stable in such a fashion, for instance, right? Like you might want to, it's important that we, in a way, do like check some of the boxes of having a true play to earn experience, where new users can come in and by like just learning the products, engaging with the product, they can eventually get to the point of building their own stables without the need to necessarily pump a ton of money into it. It will be 50-50. I'm going to grind a bit of it. I'm going to put some money into it, 50-50 or 75-25. Really depends on every person's situation. But the idea would be that you can just mint as many as you can. And there's, of course, things that we've learned from our products, like Axie with the SLPs, and like how much supply you want to have depending on how much demand there's on the market, right? And as to avoid hyperdeflation crash cycles, which are bad. Like what you want is slow and steady deflation over time up to a certain point, probably, right? So that it's you can plan for it, so that it's you can make plans around those things going in a certain direction over time. So yeah, it's more really about the shapes of the curves on this market rather than like, oh, I don't want it to go above a certain price or below this price. It's really about the how much in flux it is, right? And how we can keep it controlled. And for that, we will have, of course, limitations and valves that we can touch, almost like a central bank touches interest rates, right? Which is something that's really discussed right now with inflation going on and people on central banks hiking interest rates, right? It's like, okay, how much of that XP split 50-50 goes straight to the horse, and how much it goes straight to the market? To the pool that then can be converted to market. Okay, the market is massively saturated with XP NFTs, which is massively crushing the price. There's no real point, and there's no real avenue for anyone to grind XP and kind of self-fund, even on a rational amount of time in any possible way. Well, then maybe we should tone down the amount of XP that goes to the pool for a while, until that kind of picks up again into a healthily shaped curve, and then we can touch it again, right? So this is what I'm saying about, like, eventually our job, when we hit that ecosystem phase, our job is going to just get reduced to exclusively, okay, how much of this, how much of that, how much XP is going on in the market. If there's breeding items or sort of breeding item economy through Catalyst, I don't know, they drop at races and you can merge this item into Catalyst or whatever it is, how much of that is dropping? Who is getting them? How much in each class? Like, all of these different things that, like, in Web2 games, it's just like, live operations, balancing of the game economy is the type of things that we will just at some point when we get that ecosystem phase, that's the only things we'll focus on, plus these kind of big ticket events, right? Like, how do we do the yearly championship of ZED, right? So yeah, that's what we're thinking about, and that's the type of thinking around the XP.
Yeah, it's fascinating concepts. So the one more quick follow-up, and then we'll let you go, Facundo. So you see it as like a single-use NFT. You pay 500 ZED token or whatever, you get this NFT that you can load up the XP and sell to somebody else. They can't reuse that NFT. It's like
no. So basically, I print. Let's say I mint 1,000 XP NFT. You buy it from me. You go to ZED. You say burn this NFT, and 1,000 XP appear in your XP pool, and the NFT is gone.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, I love that concept, and it's kind of like a light bulb too. That, like, there's so many things that we haven't considered that can be done with this once you have that foundation of the working game. And we talk about all of these, like, this tech debt that you've got, design debt, and how it all being on the blockchain and these contracts make it a headache, but there's a lot of fun stuff that you can do with it too that people, I certainly haven't considered anything like that. And, I guess there's infinite ways to do that. So love that you shared that. It's exciting stuff here at the end. Anything else there, Kevin, before we let our man go?
No, I'm good. I appreciate your time, Facundo. I know you got a lot going on, but really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys. Happy to be here, and we'll do it again sometime in the future, most probably. Have a good one. Thanks for everybody listening.
Yeah, get well soon, Facundo. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Everybody can go follow Facundo. You're out on Twitter. They're probably all already following you at I am F Carril. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly.
Kevin's at Arbitrage Racing, no G. I'm at ZED Diamond Hands. Subscribe to our YouTube show and give it a like. And we're also going to be on Twitch with Lucky Jack talking about Lucky Maiden 10 Saturday at some point. So we'll put that up on YouTube too. But if you want to come in live and ask us any questions or anything like that, we'll be there Saturday, February, what's that going to be, 11th in the US sometime. So anyway, thanks, Facundo. Appreciate it.
The next
Sorry,
week is the
Facundo?
maiden for the week after is just the ZED maiden with the new class system. So yeah, everyone get breeding and ready for that one as well.
That's right.
It's going to be a blast. Okay, thanks again, Facundo. Get well soon.
Cheers. See ya.